Hello, this is Tony Hiller from RealClimateScience.com. Someone named Carl Wheatley was posting a lot of comments on a video I made yesterday. He said he was a PhD expert who has spent thousands of hours studying in how people have come to be confused about things like education, the economy, nutrition, and climate change. I've already watched and debunked lots of Tony Hiller videos, but what I'm trying to analyze is how he fools people like you about this. I study and analyze unintentional misinformation and intentional propaganda as this appears to be. Literally, the first screen is a misuse of a quote, and he has to be smart enough to know that he's conning people with this stuff. Did you read my 4 comments, or did he delete them? Anyone who has a reasonable grasp of science in general and climate science in particular immediately spots this as propaganda. Once I saw what he put on the first screen, I knew he was going to try to fool people. He's literally counting on people not having good reading comprehension on that first one, or counting on people being so desperate to believe what he's selling that they overlook how he's misleading people. Carl Wheatley began his comment with an appeal to his own authority as a PhD expert. Then he implied that he was smarter than other people because he'd spent thousands of hours studying. He said other people were susceptible to propaganda which he was above because of his education. And then he made a paranoid comment about me possibly deleting his other comments without bothering to check if that was true. We can see that Carl is prone to making suppositions without doing any actual fact-checking. Now let's look at his claim that I was misleading people with the first screen. We're going to take a look now at the clip he's referring to. In 1989, the United Nations said we only had until the year 2000 to save the planet from global warming. They said governments had a 10-year window of opportunity to solve the greenhouse effect before it goes beyond human control. I pretty much read word for word what Noel Brown of the United Nations Environment Program said. Here's the same article from the Associated Press. If the greenhouse effect goes beyond human control, that means humans can't do anything about it anymore. The propaganda was from the United Nations and the Associated Press. It wasn't from me. I was just reading it. Carl Wheatley wants people to believe that he sees something which other people don't. All that he's seen, though, is what he wants to see. He's not actually seeing what's right in front of his eyes. And as a self-proclaimed expert in propaganda, he seems to have completely missed the mindless propaganda coming from the United Nations. Here's another comment from Carl, one of the other ones which he imagines I might have deleted. Tony Hiller weirdly doesn't tell you that Glacier National Park has lots and lots of its glaciers, but losing all of them is taking longer than predicted. So the problem is real and getting worse. But because they didn't have the details down, he wants you to think everything is all right. Meanwhile, Greenland and Antarctica are melting 7 times faster than in the 1990s, and that's a lot bigger deal than the glaciers in Glacier National Park melting slower than usually predicted. So let's take a look at that part of the video. 100 years ago, experts predicted that the glaciers in Glacier National Park would be gone by 1950. Then in 1936, they changed their prediction to the glaciers being gone in 1961. Then in 1952, they changed their prediction to the glaciers being gone by the year 2000. In 2009, they changed their prediction to the glaciers being gone by the year 2020. And in 2014, they changed their prediction to the glaciers being gone by the year 2044. This reminds me of the scene from Monty Python and the Holy Grail when Sir Lancelot is running towards the castle and never gets any closer. The reality is that the glaciers in Glacier National Park have actually grown over the last 30 years. They experienced rapid melt from 1850 to 1950, then the rate of loss slowed down and now the glaciers are actually growing. Once again, Carl completely missed the point. 100 years ago, the glaciers were melting very rapidly and now they're growing. The glaciers were melting rapidly 100 years ago when carbon dioxide levels were low, but now that carbon dioxide levels are higher, the glaciers are growing. Carl thinks he's really smart, but he seems to lack basic critical thinking skills. He completely missed the points of the video. Now let's look at his claim that Greenland and Antarctica are melting 7 times faster than in the 1990s. If that were true, sea level would be rising much faster now than it was 30 years ago. But tide gauges don't show that. Sea level at New York is rising at the same rate now as it was when Abraham Lincoln was president. If what Carl was claiming was true, we would see a sharp upwards curvature after the year 1990. We can see this in the NOAA projections for sea level rise in New York. The high sea level rise scenario has the most curvature. Then comes the intermediate high, intermediate, intermediate low, and low. But actual sea level rise at New York is below the lowest scenario. We see the same thing in the San Francisco Bay. Sea level is about the same now as it was 80 years ago. Sea level at Stockholm, Sweden is falling at the same rate it was 130 years ago. There's no upwards curvature. And it's the same story at Sydney, Australia. The rate of sea level rise is about the same as it was 130 years ago. Water seeks a level surface, so if sea level rise was accelerating, we would see this upwards curvature at every single tide gauge in the world. If there are any tide gauges showing that upwards curvature, I haven't been able to find them. Carl says that Antarctica and Greenland are melting 7 times faster than they were 30 years ago. But where does he think the water's going? It's not going into the ocean. Carl seems to have a blind belief in official propaganda. And he believes that anyone who disagrees with the official government lies must not be telling the truth. Carl thinks he's very smart, educated, and superior, but he seems to lack even the most basic critical thinking skills. Ronald Reagan said, "The trouble with our liberal friends isn't that they're ignorant, it's just that they know so much which isn't true." I appreciate Carl giving me the opportunity to analyze his thought process. Most climate alarmists aren't that brave. Toto's been playing back the curtain on this mass delusion for the past 14 years. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Toki, and Upla on the web at realclimatescience.com.